Colin Mallory was biding his time. He was early for once, and took advantage with a book on a bench in the garden of the Musée Carnavalet. It was not far from where he needed to be, and he was enjoying the relaxed formality of the surroundings. He missed Bryony, of course, but they spoke on the phone during gaps in her filming schedule, exchanged messages, swapped photographs. They were due to meet in London when the shooting was over, and they could reclaim their Dalston flat, sublet when they thought that time in Paris with the Enigma Theatre Company would be longer than it was. Despite the popularity of the Enigma's English-language productions of Shakespeare at the Théâtre Marivaux, they couldn't pay their way. The little theatre near the Gare du Nord was dark now, and Colin had his days to himself. He didn't resent that the Enigma's director, Ken Westhoe, had pulled strings to get Bryony the job with Hungerford Films at short notice. He was content to wander, to explore the city while he had the chance, returning each evening to the tiny chambre de bonne that crouched beneath the roof of a building in Belleville. The buzzing of his phone told him it was time to make a move. He worked round a knot of Japanese tourists clicking furiously at the statue of Winged Victory, nipped along the arcade and left the museum through a room adorned with historic street signs. He made for the Place des Vosges. He was meeting Paul Barnard at the Galerie Marion Ducasse, though he wasn't quite sure why. It had been Paul's idea, suggested as they were leaving Le Procope last night. The meal had been excellent, but Colin's memory of the conversation was hazy. Paul, a director of Cork Street Gallery, Bainbridge and Murray, was in Paris to make arrangements for an exhibition of paintings by Lucy Potter, following her successful show in London some months earlier. He was also the partner of Colin's older sister Claire, a barrister, who combined disapproval of her brother's precarious profession and his leisurely approach to finding work with a sneaking regard for his talent. The Galerie Marion Ducasse occupied double-fronted premises in one of the arcades. Colin approached with some diffidence, intimidated by the understated elegance and assertive restraint of the frontage. He affected a nonchalant air, ambling past the windows and glancing through them with studied indifference. On the bright white walls, a few large abstracts, perhaps by a follower of Jackson Pollock. In the intervening space, several bronze figures of animals that might have been goats, or possibly antelope of a species rarely seen in the Place des Vosges. Either way, there was no sign of Paul. Were they supposed to be meeting inside or out? At his fourth pass of the gallery, the girl at the desk looked up from her screen and smiled. Then a door at the back opened and Paul, tanned and relaxed in his trademark linen suit, appeared behind a woman embodying the chic, the quiet authority of the gallery itself. Paul beckoned him in and introduced Madame Ducasse. She greeted him in fluent mid-Atlantic and said she had much enjoyed his performance as the King of Navarre in the Enigma's production of Love Labour's Lost. And the Princess of France was played by his friend Bryony, such a charming girl. What a pity she was not in Paris at the moment. But perhaps he and Paul would do her the honour of coming to dinner that evening at her apartment in the Rue du Chardonneret. It was only a few minutes' walk from the gallery. The Rue du Chardonneret, Colin knew it from his wanderings through the Marais on his way to and from the room in Belleville. He had no fixed route or timetable, no specific destination. He went where his feet led him, guided by sights and sounds along the way, taking pleasure in spontaneity and in the unexpected. It was a solitary activity, but it had to be, to wander without distraction, without suffering the inevitable compromise of companionship. He didn't take pictures, didn't take notes, wanting to live the moment, to experience the city at first hand, to savour details missed by people in a hurry. The Medusa lurking at the base of a well in the middle of a quiet square. The knocker in the shape of two seahorses on a door bearing swags of wooden fruit. The play of light and shade on the side of a church as gently swaying plane trees filtered the morning sun. The curve of a banister in a gloomy porch. The statue of Mercury seen through railings on the top of a garden wall. The one-eyed accordion player with a rabbit in a basket. The flame-haired woman walking 5 snuffling pugs, each on a lead of a different colour. He knew he'd remember them, where he'd seen them, long after he'd left Paris and gone back home. The Rue du Chardonneret was a narrow street of 17th century houses, a little austere and forbidding at first sight, but as Colin pointed out to Paul in the dwindling daylight, the pallid stonework was enlivened, his word, by balconies, rustication and elaborate carving. Madame Ducasse had an apartment at number 9. The entrance to the building was set in an archway topped by a classical pediment. She buzzed them through high double doors that gave onto a cobbled courtyard. A staircase to the right wound up to the first floor and the warm rectangle of light that framed Madame Ducasse. Her hair shone yellow gold. "Please, call me Marion." She led them to a comfortable sitting room with tall windows that faced the street and the small park opposite. While she headed to the kitchen and her unseen assistant, Colin and Paul roamed with white wine and canapé, looking at pictures, furniture, ornaments. Etchings by Matisse and Picasso vied with caricatures by Gilray and Daumier, and some Sonia Delaunay fabric designs. Braque engravings were nudging a still life by Chardin. A pair of oriental vases flanked a Giacometti stickman. All this and much more identified by Paul, who declared the eclectic arrangement inspired. Colin found it hard to take in. He sank to a chair and stared at the painting above the marble fireplace. It was the portrait of a woman in her mid-20s, perhaps. He guessed from her dress, the style of her hair, that it was painted in the 1930s. She too was sitting in a chair in front of a fireplace, hands loosely knitted in her lap, a ring glinting on one finger. She was looking directly at him with a knowing smile and a hint of complicity. Or so it seemed. The effect was disconcerting. "Paul, have you seen this one?" "Good Lord," he said, negotiating his way between two tables shaped like kidneys. "It looks like a late Vuillard, though smaller than what others I've come across." "Late who?" "Vuillard, Édouard Vuillard, probably best known for interiors and domestic scenes. He focused mainly on portraits in his last 20 years or so. He died during the war. Do you notice anything about it?" Paul took a careful step back and frowned. He said nothing for a while, and then, "The fireplace in the picture looks like this one. There are some of the same things on it, and the fire screen to her right is surely the one that's here now." He was pointing to an oval screen on a tripod base. Within its elaborate gilt frame, an embroidered bird of paradise lurked among leaves and flowers with a sharp beak and a malevolent expression that left the woman in the picture unmoved. "You mean it was painted in this room?" "Probably in the artist's studio in its final form, but she certainly seems to have sat for it here. I wonder who she is." They were called in to dinner and conversation turned to other matters. Madame Ducasse, they learned, had worked in galleries in Montpellier, Toronto, New York and Boston. She was delighted to discover that Colin had been at Harvard and reminisced about the hours spent in Cambridge bookshops. Then, in the sitting room over coffee and Armagnac, Paul put the question that had been left hanging. "She's my great-aunt Sylvie," said Marion, "Sylvie Charlot, as she was in about 1935 or 36, I think, certainly before the war. She died only a few years ago at the age of 100 and something. She put her longevity down to cigarettes and red wine. I inherited the picture along with the apartment. She lived here all her life." "So you knew the picture long before it passed to you," said Colin. "No. There was a mirror over the fireplace during her lifetime, at least in all the years that I came here. The painting was found by some workmen behind a false wall in a cupboard, in the cupboard you passed in the hall. It was wrapped in a blanket and an old pair of curtains." "Why was it hidden?" asked Paul. "It was a really good picture." "It was painted in happier times. It held too many memories, I suppose. A long time ago now." The room went quiet. Legs were crossed and uncrossed. Armagnac sipped, coffee slurped. It was Colin who broke the silence. The fireplace in the picture and the screen." "Yes, and the miniatures you see hanging beside the fireplace. She was in this room, roughly where I'm sitting now." "Exactly where you're sitting now," thought Paul, "and the resemblance is striking, though Sylvie looks a good deal more cheerful." "I was saying to Colin that it looked a bit like one of Vuillard's late portraits, though I haven't spotted a signature. There's a lot of detail, flowers, pictures, objects, showing Sylvie in her surroundings." "In her home," said Madame Ducasse distantly. "But yes, quite relaxed and informal. Vuillard was my theory too, but I found no reference in his catalogue raisonné or anywhere else to a portrait of Sylvie Charlot, and none of my contacts in the art world was aware of its existence. I even went to the Institut de France to look at his journal for the years when the picture must have been painted. He gives a lot of information about the process of making his paintings and what he thought about his clients, but the journal is silent about this one. Vuillard made extensive preliminary drawings and sketches, and often took photographs too, said Paul. Have none of these turned up? No, which may cast further doubt on Vuillard as the painter, but there's nothing to suggest any other artist either. A gentle knock at the door. It opened a crack to reveal the pink face of the girl who'd spent most of the evening in the kitchen. Do excuse me, said Madame Ducasse. I must find my bag. As 2 pairs of heels sounded down the corridor, Paul scrambled to his feet and eased the door shut. Quick, take a photograph of the picture while I keep guard. Colin pulled out his phone and took several. They slid back to their places and reached for their glasses, just as the handle of the door was beginning to turn. They stepped into the chill of the Rue du Chardonneret and crossed the road. Damp cobbles gleamed in the subdued light of a lantern. It was suspended from a bracket on the building next to number 9. As Colin looked up at the tall windows of the room they had just left, the curtains of one of them appeared to part. A figure was staring directly at them. "Who's that there?" "Who's that where?" asked Paul. There was no one at the window, and the curtains were closed. "It must have been Madame. Then she's grown a bit in the last few minutes," said Colin. "Perhaps it was the elusive Monsieur Ducasse. I believe he died some years ago. Fancy a quick one?" In the bar of Le Singe Fou, they looked at the photographs on Colin's phone. Some focused on details, others showed the picture as a whole. "Still no sign of a signature," said Paul. "The stain is a bit odd," said Colin. "It didn't seem so prominent in the room." He was pointing at a damson-coloured mark on the rug in front of the fireplace. "It's like a bruise." "I don't think it's a stain, but it is odd, almost random." "Maybe it's a shadow." "Of what? There's nothing there." "Of something outside the picture. I can't see much point, unless, of course, the original painting was bigger and you could see what was casting the shadow." "Cut down, you mean? Why should anyone do that?" "Why, indeed."